Reading from the message this morning, Mark 2, verses 1 to 12. After a few days, Jesus returned to Capernaum, and word got around that he was back home. A crowd gathered, jamming the entrance so no one could get in or out. He was teaching the word. They brought a paraplegic to him, carried by 4 men. When they weren't able to get in because of the crowd, they removed part of the roof and lowered the paraplegic on his stretcher. Impressed by their bold belief, Jesus said to the paraplegic, "Son, I forgive your sins." Some religion scholars sitting there started whispering among themselves, "He can't talk that way. That's blasphemy. God and only God can forgive sins." Jesus knew right away what they were thinking and said, "Why are you so skeptical? Which is simpler, to say to the paraplegic, 'I forgive your sins,' or say, 'Get up, take your stretcher and start walking'? Well, just so it's clear that I'm the Son of Man and authorized to do either or both," he looked now at the paraplegic, "get up, pick up your stretcher and go home." And the man did it, got up, grabbed his stretcher and walked out with everyone there watching him. They rubbed their eyes, stunned, and then praised God, saying, "We've never seen anything like this." Pastor Will.
Thanks, Laura, for that reading. So yeah, we are into Mark chapter 2 now. So this is what it's like. We've been doing this series. We're staying in one book for a long time, and the snow is falling, and we're only in chapter 2. So I've enjoyed going through it this way. I've talked to some of you who've had interesting things to say, and so I'm hoping that this continues to be a blessing for us. So we are looking at this story, interesting story, confusing story, as many of them are. And one of the things that we get to do when we stack all of these stories together is that all of the previous stories inform the next one. And I don't know about you, if you've been picking up themes and patterns, but one of the things that's jumped out to me is that there's this weird reluctance that Jesus has to people talking about him. It seems to us, as a church, we want to grow. We want people to come here. We have land to use. We want to share our story and Jesus' story. So you kind of need to talk about it. And all around us, there are churches who are better at talking about their faith, maybe. There are churches where they have programs and systems where that's encouraged and nurtured and expected. And we don't do that as much, and sometimes we feel like maybe we should be doing that more. And then we see Jesus here in the Gospel of Mark, and he says, "Yeah, don't tell anybody. I'm going to heal you, but don't tell other people about this." Well, why not? There's kind of this weird double impulse that this is a good thing. We want to talk about it, but Jesus says not to. But then we get into this story. Jesus is teaching in somebody's house, and the place is full. So Jesus has been telling people, don't spread the word, but the room is full. The word has been spread. So it's kind of this weird thing. Jesus doesn't want people to know, but people are finding out. So what's happening there? Well, there are a couple of possibilities. We see in previous stories that Jesus needs to get away, just like we do. We can't constantly be working. We can't put in 12-hour days without end. So Jesus retreats so that he can rest, so that he can rejuvenate. And a big part of what he's doing is also training up his disciples. If he's always healing people, if he's always teaching in crowds, he can't be doing that part. So it could be prioritization of energy. It could also be that he doesn't want random people saying random things. He just wants the right things to get out. And part of it is he's especially telling these evil spirits that we encounter early in Mark chapter 1. We don't know much about them, but Jesus especially wants them to be quiet, which makes sense. You don't want the legitimacy of Jesus to be built on the reputation of these spirits. So that kind of makes sense, a little bit of message control. But the other thing that matters is the powers that be, the religious powers, the political powers. They would be interested in what Jesus is doing so that they could intervene and limit the interference that Jesus might have in their lives. So, lots of reasons, good reasons to keep quiet, lots of good reasons that we think for people to tell stories, and people seem to be filtering that on their own. Word is getting out, even though Jesus is telling people to be quiet. The other question that comes to my mind as we've been reading these stories, for Jesus to rest, for him to keep it quiet, it means that some people who might need his help aren't going to get it. Jesus heals for a while and then he retreats. Everybody's looking for him. Well, he's off in the hills praying somewhere. So how does Jesus decide which people get healed and which ones don't? Now, at some level, this is a historic curiosity for us. In this story, why is Jesus turning away what we imagine is a lineup of broken people that need healing outside of the home? But it's very real for us now, because we identify sometimes with the people outside who are waiting to get in. Part of what we're doing in this series is asking who Jesus is. And in this story, there's people asking that question, but it's the scribes, it's the religious experts who are asking that. And it seems like maybe this is partly why Jesus didn't want everybody to be talking about it, because they don't really want to know in a good way. Right? They're not there to celebrate Jesus' legacy. They're not there to celebrate the ministry, the work that Jesus is doing. They want to kind of filter it through the right channels so they know, okay, now, and we feel this ourselves, other people do this to us, now we've put a label on Jesus, now we know what to do with him, where to send him, what questions to ask to reject him. So that's partly what happens when word gets out, that you get kind of filtered, you get limited based on the boxes people want to put you in. Now, Jesus is in this place, he's in a house. It seems like he's back home in Capernaum. Capernaum is a bigger town than Galilee. So he's in Capernaum, he's going to be teaching. It seems maybe he's in the same home before, the home of Peter's mother-in-law. And the place is full. It's crowded. Nobody can get in. And this sick man has come to the door. There are some key details missing. Who is he? Who are his friends? In the story it says they. And it could be the friends who do the kind of lifting, taking him to the roof. But we imagine the disciples are partly there as crowd control. They might have been sitting inside close to Jesus, but they might have also been outside saying, hey, listen, Jesus is teaching, but the room is full, and we can kind of summarize some of the points. So that's partly the idea. It could be, and also, when we get later on in the story, they've lifted the roof off. Well, why would they do that? Why would they feel like they could do that? Well, if it's the disciples, including Peter, well, then he might have the authority since he's connected to the family. So there are questions, and sometimes we can kind of finagle details to get answers. But the questions of the characters themselves, these are important because we also identify with these questions. So, the tricky part of this process sometimes, I think it's worth noting, is that when we put ourselves in the stories, we want to be the good guys. We want to be the disciples who are learning things. We want to be the people who are healed of ailments, and we get to experience Jesus as healer and redeemer and all of the things on the poster. But sometimes, whether we like it or not, in order for us to experience the stories in the most transformative way, we have to put ourselves into the place of the skeptics and the scholars in this story. So here's the scene. It's painted for us. Jesus is in the house, and he's teaching. It's standing room only. Everybody's crowded in. Mark doesn't bother to tell us what Jesus is teaching. Is he explaining Old Testament scripture? Is he making connections in the history of Israel, the kingly line? Is he commenting on the political situation with Rome and the puppet kings that are installed? Could have been any of those things, but the place is crowded. That's all we know. We don't know what they're talking about. We don't know who's there, except for there's a few, what the message says, religious experts. They're among the crowd, and this man comes to the door being carried on a stretcher by his friends, and there's no room for him. Like there's no room for more people to walk in, let alone for somebody taking up a full stretcher. So this the thought process of these people to get in, that's one of the details that I'd like to see. How did they come to that conclusion? But they decide, hey, we've come for this healing. We're not going back until the healer has seen our friend. So up they go to the roof, and they pull back the support bars. They pull back the branches, the leaves, whatever it is. They pull it back, and they can lower their friend down on ropes. And whatever's happening, whatever Jesus is talking about, whatever wisdom he's imparting on the crowd that's there, all of a sudden everybody's attention is on the sick man. And it's worth noting in this story that we don't see any agency from the sick man himself. He's not asking for healing. This isn't something imposed against his will. That's not what I'm saying. But he probably doesn't feel like he deserves the healing. And this is something we see sometimes where we reach out to a friend who needs help, and they tell us not to bother about it. Don't worry about me, I'll be fine. Don't trouble yourself. And our friends, our family are bending over backwards. Hey, no, I care about you. I want to be there for you. How can I help? No, don't worry about it. So this is me sort of guessing, making assumptions based on some of the details. But we never see him actively say, hey guys, get me in there. I need this. We got to get into the room. We don't see that. It could have happened, but we don't see it. But the reason I think it's important is when the man is lowered down and Jesus sees him, the first thing that Jesus says is, my son, you are forgiven. Now, the message, as Laura read, makes it a little bit more personal. I forgive you of your sins. Now, this might hit us a little bit weird. It certainly hit the scribes, the experts, a little bit weird. Because already they're trying to figure out, Jesus, who are you? What camp do you belong to? What tradition are you a part of? Because we're ready to engage you in a debate about ideas. We're ready to have that conflict. So which camp do you fit in? Because they are scribes and experts, and they've studied the stories, and they've studied the laws, and they think they know how things work. They know what camp they are in, and they want to know what camp Jesus is in so that they can debate those ideas. And so now this man is lowered in, and the first thing Jesus says is that this man's sins are forgiven. So it's easy to jump on the differences between these two groups, but there's a whole lot that's similar. Now, if this man had offended Jesus personally or harmed Jesus personally, the scribes would say, well, yeah, Jesus, as the victim of this man's actions, you can forgive him. As all of us have our own choice and power to forgive the people who've harmed us. They would say, well, yeah, Jesus, you have the power to do that. And they would also both agree, Jesus and the scholars would say, well, yes, God also has the power to forgive sin, the sort of universal term for things that interfere with our divine creation. The things that take us away from God, God can forgive. God can reach in and bridge that divide. The scribes would say, absolutely, God can do that. And even they would say, well, yes, we can help people in that. And the scribes would say, well, yeah, the priests, some of them would have been priests. Well, yeah, that's what we are doing. We lead people through religious rituals and systems, and they can bring sacrifices, and they can make donations, and they can say prayers, and then they will be forgiven because we've guided them through that process. But this guy, he's just laying on the mat. His friends are doing all of the work. This guy hasn't done anything to deserve forgiveness. Maybe God has forgiven him out of God's abundant grace, but you, Jesus, you don't know that that's happened. So the only explanation that's obvious to us is that Jesus himself has initiated the forgiveness, and this scandalizes the priests, the experts. They've studied the law, and there's no room in the law for a person to do this. So, but why does that offend us in our contemporary mindset? I've gone to the hospital from time to time, and they've never forgiven me. Which, I might not be excited to get when I was there. And in fact, sometimes they're quite harsh. I played a hockey game when I was in Korea. That's a long story. I can tell that another time. But anyways, I was in Korea, and I was a defenseman, a good defenseman. You can take my word on that one. And a slap shot came in, and it hit me in the ribs. And I had padding there, but the shot came in pretty hard. And I had trouble breathing for the next night. I didn't sleep terribly well. And the day after that, even worse. And it was just getting unbearable. So I went to the doctor and I said, I think I've got a cracked rib. And he looked at me. And if you think Canadian doctors don't have great bedside manner, Korean doctors, I feel like it's even less a part of their training. Because I said, and his English was good, I said, I think it's a cracked rib, and he laughed. The very opposite of forgiveness. He said, no, if you had a cracked rib, you wouldn't be walking. So he, gave me some medication and explained it's a contusion, showed me some pictures. No forgiveness. Other times, I went into the hospital a little while ago because I had crazy gas pain. I don't know where it came from. And there too, they were sympathetic, a little bit better bedside manner. And they said, yeah, it's super common, don't worry about it. But still not forgiveness. And forgiveness is this powerful thing in our lives that we can release other people from their guilt. We can start to repair relationships when we forgive other people. But you can sometimes, and some of you have experienced this, you can sometimes make things worse by forgiving before somebody's ready to apologize. Right? I'm sure if I were to walk up to any of you right now and say, I forgive you, some of you would say, hold on, what have I done that needs forgiving? So already forgiveness is a bit of a landmine in our lives that if we don't know what's being forgiven, we don't know if we want it. And so in this story, Jesus immediately, is the first thing he says, son, your sins are forgiven. Well, why? Why does this guy even need forgiveness? So already there's obviously 2,000 years of cultural development. Things have have changed, our mindsets have shifted. But in that world, in that worldview, there was an understanding that when bad things happened to people, it's because they deserved it. And God was behind this kind of cosmic equation of merit, deserving good and bad things. So then there must be something this guy has done to offend God, that he deserves it. So then other people could say, well, he deserves it, like we don't need to feel too bad for him. And in fact, if we're too sympathetic, then we're kind of interfering with God's punishment. And that's not exclusive to this, first century Judaism. It lines up with what some religions teach about karma, and it lines up with what a lot of us understand of cosmic justice in our own world. Now, that's not an official belief of ours. But every now and then, we will say things that reveal what's really going on in our hearts. It's no secret to you that I'm a sports fan, and I'm also, I like to be a storyteller. And sometimes those worlds collide, especially around the Olympics. The Olympics are a funny time because we don't spend a lot of our lives learning about cross-country skiing or the various other individual amateur sports that are celebrated at the Olympics. But when this time comes, we turn on the TVs and the commentators tell us the story of the athlete who's there. And we learn about their upbringing, where they grew up. We see an interview with their coach from when they were a little athlete getting into the game. And all of a sudden we are emotionally invested. And then when they win, we celebrate with them, and we see the family cheering, and we see the people who've made sacrifices, and they're crying, and we feel like it was inevitable. It had to be that way because this person is so good. They deserve it. They worked so hard, and they deserve this win. Those are beautiful moments in our lives and the lives of our country. But that storytelling process that we do, that journalists help us with, we do that with ourselves. And so sometimes we put work in our employment or in our school or in our relationships. We put in work and we have a goal in mind. And when we achieve the goal, fantastic. But when the goal doesn't happen, then all of a sudden we feel like, I must have done something wrong. Well, no, just the person who got a bronze medal didn't do a whole lot of things wrong. They just weren't gold medal caliber on that particular day. So there are times where all of a sudden things have gone wrong, and we feel like, okay, I had this coming. I deserve this. And that can happen in relationships. I have a little bit of experience with that. It can happen in education. You can study and still fail a test. What happens then? Did you not study hard enough? Well, no. And then if you fail it, then you're like, I'm a failure. And so when Jesus says to this man who's hanging, dangling from the ceiling, you were forgiven, Jesus is releasing this man from that internal conversation about merit. I can imagine this man looking at Jesus saying, hey, I'm sorry for barging in on your class or the workshop you're doing. They brought me here, they lowered me down. I don't deserve this. I'm sorry about all of this. Again, I'm guessing, I'm speculating, I'm putting words in between words here that aren't written in. But the man there's no indication that the man wanted this. And I think that's because he didn't think he deserved this. And so Jesus looks in his eyes and he says, hey, you're forgiven. All the things you think that you've done that make you deserve this life, no, that's not what this is. You're forgiven. All of that is gone. All off your shoulders. All of that is released from your the burden that you're carrying. It's gone. So he says this, the priests, the experts, they are confused, even angry. Now, Jesus could look into the sick man's eyes and see what he was feeling, and he looks around the room and he can see the experts, what they're feeling. Now, maybe this is divine knowledge, but we have people in our lives who can read us really well. Maybe Jesus just had that ability. And he looks at the experts and he can see they're angry, they're grumpy. Right? It's not supposed to go this way. Now, Jesus looks at this man who, if my guess is correct, this man's just had a lifetime of emotional baggage lifted from him. And he's feeling better already. And he looks over at the priests who say, no, you can't do that. And Jesus says, making this man happy, releasing him from these burdens, I can't do this. So he explains to them, listen, which one is harder, to forgive or to heal? Now, this is for us, for our contemporary eyes. Well, yeah, Jesus forgives. That's what he does. That's not hard. But to heal, that's miraculous power. Well, in those days, there were healers, sometimes medical healers, sometimes spiritual healers, whatever. There were healers. So the experts would have said, well, yeah, anybody can heal if God has given them that power. But to forgive sins, that's a whole other thing. And so Jesus says, okay, we're gonna bridge this divide. You don't think I have the power to forgive? All right, well, I'm going to heal this man. And so what happens is this man who was sick and burdened by his own feelings of guilt, whether from his own words or from other people imposing them on him, this man is healed. He gets up. He's able to walk away. And so even for the experts, they would have said, okay, if somebody can heal, that power comes from God. So before this, they would have said, well, Jesus is lying. He's blaspheming. He's doing things that God says he can't do. But now he's healed. He could only heal if he had power from God. And God wouldn't give power to a liar, to a blasphemer. So now what do we do? So Jesus bridges that divide. The spiritual power to forgive and the medical power to heal, he's doing them both. Now, it's interesting that the people who have hard questions about who Jesus is, what he's allowed to do, they are in the room. They are the experts. They are the skeptics that have hard questions for Jesus. They have questions. The man who needed to be healed, his friends, they knew who Jesus was. And that's why some scholars kind of suggest maybe it's the disciples who made the decision to have him lowered in. But they know who Jesus is. They needed healing. And when we are desperate, our understanding of who Jesus is becomes a lot clearer. But in our comfort, in our academic comfort, we sometimes we build up questions that the weak, the sick, the desperate, they don't have. Jesus exercised power in this situation. Jesus exercised authority in this story. Authority over the sin that this man was carrying, authority over the disease that he was carrying, but also authority over the mental process that the skeptics had. They had this idea, this kind of structured idea. You have to do it this way, and then God will do this thing, but only if you do those other steps right. So Jesus proved to them wrong about who he was, but there's also, it seems to be that there's a sense of who God is. What Jesus is capable of, but also the character, the personality of the God that Jesus was telling them about. So in this story, as Laura read for you, as you've been listening to me expound on, You might have identified with different people in this story, and at different times of your life, it'll feel that way. For some of us, we are the friends. We have somebody who needs healing, and we're praying, and we're just hoping God can step in and make room for us. Sometimes we are the ones who are sick. Sometimes we are the ones who need healing or hope or peace, whatever it is. And then that's where we find ourselves in the story. And oftentimes, too, we're the skeptics. We've got questions. It doesn't work that way. Those people from that church, they say it this way, and it doesn't make sense. It shouldn't work that way. And Jesus is here to say, you're forgiven. Jesus has the power to forgive. So when you're laying there saying, well, I had this coming, I deserve it. No, you're forgiven. You don't deserve things. You don't bring trauma onto yourself because you're carrying guilt and sin from the past. As people draw near to Jesus, they sometimes experience physical healing, but that forgiveness, that releasing us from the burden, is also important. So as we do that, as we get a sense of what we need, as we get a sense of who Jesus is, may we experience that healing, experience the forgiveness, and experience the hope that he seeks to provide.